work. So on the next page, I'll show. I've got a picture of this baby chick. She's 1 day old. She's in our coop. She's coming out into the world for the first time ever, and I put that there because this is really the most critical part about gross profit analysis. You can't decide to do it at the last day of the year for the year before. You have to decide on the first day of the year you want to do it because you need good records, and that really is the most important thing about it, is to keep good records, because from day one, from the day you walk out of the coop, because if you have the data, you can analyze it 3 or 4 or 10 different ways, but you have to have it. So that's my plug for good record keeping. So on the next page, you'll see that here's kind of the analysis. Craig, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, Craig, but you're going to go into a little more detail next week on how to actually run these analyses. But what I've shown you is kind of the results, and this is based on our last year. So, here's our gross income for all of our 3 different accounts, and then I'm showing you the variable expense allocation that was, that happened, or that was a direct result of servicing those 3 markets, and then at the bottom is the gross percentage of gross profit. And what's interesting is that you have a gut sense of maybe what and where your weak points are, or which accounts may not be as profitable. But sometimes the numbers don't lie, and once you get them on the paper and you really run it, some things you might start to see things a little bit differently. So I would encourage you not to just say, oh, I know that the CSA is the weakest point in terms of financials, but we love all our families, and we have to, we can't not sell to them. Don't use those kinds of internal gut reactions in lieu of doing a gross profit analysis, because sometimes you might be pretty amazed at how the numbers roll out. But for our purposes, you can see here that our grocer account really was dogging it a little bit. I mean, we're at 35%. Versus the 44 or 48%, and that starts to add up when you think about, well, gosh, for every dollar I'm out or hour of my time I'm spending, I could be getting a return of 48% or 35%. Is pretty obvious where you would want to focus. And so on the next page, I think it's important to remember, based on those numbers, that gross profit is different than net profit. I mean, the numbers that I was showing you there were really just our variable expenses, so that 44 or 48 or 35% profit still has to cover all of our fixed costs to get your net profit. But it's important, and it's one point of analysis or reference to help separate what we call the beans from the chaff, since we don't grow wheat. So I hope you'll forgive me the pun, but it really is nice to see the numbers and to have them validate or change your perspective in terms of how you view your markets on an annual basis. So the gross profit analysis, sometimes with all these factors and tools, your decision making can feel like kind of a needle in a haystack. But on the next page, Craig, you'll see our dog Samson in a pile of leaves, which is also kind of the same thing. It's hard to see, but when you're facing a big decision, like whether or not to drop or add a market, it's really important to review how that decision indicated by your gross profit analysis is aligned with both your holistic context and your strategic plan. So it's, like I said, it's one point of reference. It's not the only point. But for us, we said, okay, the rest, the grocer account is our lowest performing, as the least gross profit for us. But we also thought about, which markets do we most enjoy serving, which accounts are most satisfying, and for us, we said, well, this is in line with our holistic context and our strategic plan, because we don't really enjoy taking these trips into the bowels of Portland to deliver to a distributor when we could be handing off vegetables to our CSA families who immediately appreciate and use them. And we don't enjoy the extra packaging that's required and the uniformity that we have to produce our vegetables in order for them to be saleable in a retail or grocery environment. So it's, like I said, it's just important that you do the analysis, but then also balance that against your holistic context and where you're going. I mean, we thought about those things, and we also said, you know, which markets have the most growth potential, which markets have the most stability. And ultimately, we did decide to not sell to our grocers for this coming year because we really just felt like everything kind of aligned, and the characteristics of our produce shine the best when there's value, or when we have diversity and high quality. And so naturally we felt like we would be inefficient growers for wholesale markets, but we'll focus on the chefs and our CSA families, where variability and variety and quality are all really highly valued. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe next year I can report back to Craig, but you know, each year our holistic financial planning process really leads us to new discoveries and insights, and those are truly vital to improving our profitability and our overall health. That's been just tremendous asset to how we have managed our farm and made decisions, and I'm really pleased with the process and the ability to kind of capture all these disparate pieces into one whole, and feel like moving forward we're not having to get muddled down in the little details. That's all I had, Craig. The next page, I think, just has my contact information in case anybody is interested or would like to go ahead and contact me about anything they heard, or if they had wanted more specifics, you can reach me at the website or my email address. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Craig, or maybe at this point, Colette, you wanted to ask for questions?
We do have a couple questions, April, and I want to thank you for that presentation. It was great. And I think your examples were really helpful in tying together what we learned last week about developing a holistic context and about the 7 filters, and then getting into more specifics about how that works for you. So we do have a couple questions. Lori asks, when planning for your profit, can you give an example of the correlation of the weak link and the income minus profit equals expenses?
Okay, and is that for me or for Craig? Or
she typed it in during your presentation, but I think you know, either one of you could address that.
Yeah, well, I would love to. I'll put in my 2 cents, and then Craig, you add anything if you want to. On an annual basis, we do sit down and look at create kind of our plan, and we do say, okay, here's our estimated income for us. For instance, we go and sit down with our restaurant accounts, so all of our chefs that we sell to, we actually sit down with them and say, here's what we sold last year, and here's what we're thinking for this year, and we create together kind of an estimated income budget, or revenue, I guess I should say. So we take those revenue estimates, and that is what we then decide, okay, let's take the profit, decide what we want for our profit, and subtract that off, and that's when we're left with our expenses. And so it's that portion of the expenses that then, when we sit down to brainstorm, okay, how are we going to spend, or where are we going to spend our money? We have this amount. We start to think about our weak links, and we start to think about our log jams. We start to think about, you know, the symptoms of things that didn't go right or that we would like to change. And that's the place where we delve down into the weak link, for instance, or any of those other 7 filters to try and help us really determine where that we want to spend our limited resources, in this case, our money on our expense side. So does that, I hope that helps. And Craig, if you've got anything to add.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I think when you're looking at expenses, and I'll go into that a little bit in a minute here, but you're looking at the type of expenses you're dealing with, and the weak link, when you find out what the the weak link is in a particular enterprise, that is what we call a wealth-generating expense. Essentially, that's a high-priority expense because it will, if you fix that weak link in that particular enterprise, it should generate you additional income. So that expense actually becomes like I say, a high-priority expense, and that's as you. So when you're allocating those dollars to those various expenses, you're looking at prioritizing those expenses based on the type. As I said, I'll go into that a little bit in a few minutes, but we're looking at, whether it's a wealth-generating expense, is it a maintenance expense, or is it an expense that you have to pay no matter what? But if it's a wealth-generating expense, that's an area that you want to prioritize your money towards, and then use that. Actually, that's where the marginal reaction test comes in, and again, I'll talk about this in a minute. But it comes into play is about how much money to allocate to various activities. When you or two actions, you compare the two versus return on dollar versus return per hour of labor to get an idea of which one may help, where you may get the biggest impact for your dollar or time invested. So that's again where that marginal reaction would also come into play as far as a testing goes.
I wanted to add one more thing real quickly, if I could, too, and that was in terms of an example of the income minus profit. For us, that was one of the most important pieces of taking on the holistic financial planning, was understanding that once we developed our revenue, I mean, we had a good sense of on an annual basis what the revenue would be, but to say, okay, this is the profit that we're going after. The value of that for us was to then say, we're going to plan on, if we spend this much time and energy growing and selling this much produce, well, at the end of the year, if we had, $20,000 of profit or $10,000 or whatever your number is that worth a year of our time? Is that worth a year of devoting this kind of energies and resources to turning around and having that profit at the end of the year? And that is, kind of step one to say, oh, yeah, it is, or, that's not really worth it. If I'm going to go through all of this pain and suffering and crawling around on my hands and knees to grow vegetables, but at the end of the year I'm only going to end up with, X thousand dollars, then that's the point where you can really make big changes into what you're doing to find a way to make it feasible, and you can use all those filters and brainstorming activities to figure out how to get there. And that's what we did.
Great, thank you. Lori says that helps a great deal.
Oh, good.
We have a couple other questions for April that are really about your production, your hog production. Mm-hmm. One of the questions is, how many pigs did you raise and sell in 2013?
Okay. In 2013, we actually were in a transition. On an average year, we'll sell anywhere between 10 to 25 hogs, and we do not do any breeding sales. We only sell pastured pork, so the animals are born here and they die right at the farm, and then they go to the butcher of the customer's choice. Last year, we were in a transition phase, and we only had one sow. Because we're working on improving our breeding stock, so we're talking about more production conversion weaklings on that side. But we had a litter of 8 piglets, and that was all we did last year.